Picture a mother-to-be, just weeks away from holding her baby boy, brutally murdered in a place meant for peaceful rest. Valerie Laguna never got to meet her son. She never got to watch her daughters grow up. On July 19, 2005, her life was savagely ripped away at Cristo Rey Cemetery in Cotulla, Texas. The 26-year-old was sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled. Her unborn child dying with her. For 20 long years, her killer breathed the same air as her grieving family, walked the same streets, maybe even attended the same church. How would you feel if someone you loved was taken so brutally, and it took decades for justice? Valerie's daughters grew up without their mother, carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Her family endured sleepless nights, wondering if they'd ever know who destroyed their world. The community of Cotulla lived with a terrifying reality, a killer among them, hiding in plain sight. But in 2025, a breakthrough that no one expected finally brought justice. Advanced DNA technology would expose a truth so shocking that it sent shockwaves through the entire community. Stay with me to discover how this long-buried secret finally came to light, and learn the identity of the monster who thought he'd gotten away with murder. Don't let this shocking case fade into the shadows. Subscribe now to uncover the darkest true crime stories before they're forgotten. Ignore this, and you'll miss the truth. Subscribe now, unless you'd rather stay in the dark and pretend it never happened. Valerie Laguna was more than just a statistic. She was a 26-year-old woman with dreams, hopes, and 2 young daughters who needed their mother. In the tight-knit community of Cotulla, Texas, everyone knew Valerie. She was the kind of person who lit up a room, always ready with a smile for neighbors and friends. Her daughters looked up to her as their hero, their protector, their everything. She worked hard to provide for her family, juggling motherhood with determination that inspired those around her. Life wasn't always easy, but Valerie faced every challenge with courage. The summer of 2005 brought new hope into Valerie's world. She was 8 months pregnant with a baby boy. The excitement was overwhelming. Her daughters couldn't wait to become big sisters, constantly talking to their baby brother through mommy's belly. Valerie spent hours picking out tiny clothes, choosing the perfect name, and preparing for the moment she'd hold her son. She glowed with that special radiance that only expectant mothers possess. Her partner shared in the joy, making plans for their growing family. They talked about the future, about watching their son take his first steps, say his first words. Valerie would often place her hands on her stomach, feeling those precious kicks that reminded her of the miracle growing inside. She was so close to completing her family, just weeks away from the happiness she'd dreamed of. But fate had other plans. On that horrific July morning, Valerie's body was discovered at Cristo Rey Cemetery, a place where families came to honor the dead, not create new victims. The scene was beyond comprehension. Evidence of sexual assault, brutal beating, and strangulation painted a picture of pure evil. Her unborn son, so close to taking his first breath, died alongside his mother. The initial investigation launched immediately, with officers collecting DNA samples and interviewing potential witnesses. But the killer seemed to vanish into thin air. The impact on Cotulla was devastating. Valerie's daughters, now motherless, faced a future without the woman who meant everything to them. They would grow up carrying questions that no child should bear, wondering why someone took their mother away, why their baby brother never came home. The community reeled from the loss, families holding their loved ones tighter, mothers walking with constant fear. Church services became memorials. Neighborhood conversations turned to whispered theories about who could commit such horror. For 20 years, this wound remained open, bleeding fresh pain with each passing anniversary, each birthday Valerie would never celebrate, each milestone her son would never reach. The morning Valerie's body was discovered, LaSalle County investigators knew they were racing against time. Every hour that passed meant potential evidence could disappear, witnesses could forget crucial details, and the killer could slip further away. Detectives worked frantically, collecting DNA samples from the crime scene, interviewing anyone who might have seen something, anything, that could lead them to the monster responsible. They followed every lead, no matter how small. Neighbors were questioned, acquaintances were scrutinized, and potential suspects were brought in for questioning. The evidence was there. DNA, physical traces that the killer left behind in his violent rage. But matching that evidence to a person? That was the challenge that would haunt investigators for years to come. As months turned into years, the case file grew thicker, but the answers remained elusive. The technology of 2005 had its limits. DNA analysis wasn't the powerful tool it would later become. Databases were smaller, processing took longer, and the sophisticated techniques that could extract profiles from degraded samples simply didn't exist yet. Leads dried up one by one. Witnesses moved away, or their memories faded. The killer seemed to have vanished completely, leaving behind only pain and unanswered questions. Officers who started on the case retired, passing the file to new investigators who inherited the weight of 2 decades of frustration. But they never gave up. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. In 2020, the LaSalle County Sheriff's Office made a decision that would finally bring justice. They submitted evidence to Bode Technology, a private forensic laboratory with cutting-edge capabilities. The Sexual Assault Kit Initiative program provided the funding needed to pursue this advanced analysis. For the first time in 20 years, hope began to stir. In 2021, the Texas Rangers identified Valerie's case for special attention under the SACI program. By 2023, Bode Technology conducted additional analysis on both old evidence and newly discovered materials. The DNA comparisons revealed a match that would shock everyone involved. The name that emerged from those lab results belonged to someone who had been hiding in plain sight for 2 decades, Saul Gonzalez. But who was this man? How had he managed to live freely among the very people who mourned Valerie's death? The answer would send shock waves through Cotulla like nothing they'd ever experienced. What happened next would prove that sometimes the most devastating betrayals come from the places you least expect. August 29, 2025. 20 years, 1 month, and 10 days after Valerie's murder, handcuffs finally clicked around the wrists of her killer. When news broke that Saul Gonzalez had been arrested, the reaction was explosive. Valerie's daughters, now grown women who had spent their entire adult lives without their mother, broke down in disbelief. The man who destroyed their family had been living freely all these years while they carried the weight of grief and unanswered questions. Neighbors in Cotulla couldn't comprehend it. This was someone they knew, someone who had attended community events, someone who had looked them in the eye knowing what he had done. The shock rippled through every household, every conversation, every prayer. How do you process the fact that a killer has been hiding among you for 2 decades? The emotional tsunami was overwhelming. Relief mixed with rage, joy mixed with heartbreak for all the years lost. The evidence that sealed Gonzalez's fate was undeniable. Advanced DNA analysis had extracted his genetic profile from evidence collected at the crime scene 20 years earlier. The technology that didn't exist in 2005 had finally caught up with justice. Bode Technology's sophisticated testing revealed Gonzalez's DNA on multiple pieces of evidence, creating an ironclad connection to Valerie's murder. After years of dead-end leads and false hopes, this wasn't circumstantial evidence or witness testimony that could be questioned. This was science speaking with absolute certainty. The DNA didn't lie, couldn't be manipulated, couldn't be explained away. Investigators had their smoking gun, and it pointed directly at a man who thought he'd committed the perfect crime. The genetic breadcrumbs he left behind had finally led justice straight to his door. Saul Gonzalez had managed to live a seemingly normal life in the very community he had terrorized. Details about his background remain limited due to ongoing legal proceedings, but his arrest at Eagleford Crossing was swift and without incident. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. How would Valerie's family and the community react when they learned the full truth about the man who had stolen so much from them? The emotional earthquake that followed would test the strength of an entire community. For Valerie's daughters, the arrest brought a flood of emotions they never expected to feel simultaneously. 20 years of wondering, 20 years of looking at every man in town and asking themselves, could it be him? The phone call that changed everything came on an ordinary day, but the words were anything but ordinary. Their mother's killer finally had a name, a face, a future behind bars. The older daughter collapsed in tears, not just from relief, but from the overwhelming realization that their nightmare was finally ending. The younger one felt rage she didn't know she possessed, anger at all the birthdays, graduations, and milestones their mother missed because of one man's evil choice. They hugged each other tighter than they had in years, finally able to grieve properly, knowing that justice was within reach. The closure they thought might never come was washing over them like a healing wave, but it also reopened wounds that had scarred over time. The Cotulla community erupted in a mixture of celebration and horror. Church bells rang out as news spread from house to house, but the joy was tainted with a disturbing truth. They had been living alongside a killer for 2 decades. Coffee shops buzzed with conversations about how many times they'd crossed paths with Gonzalez, how many community events he'd attended while carrying this deadly secret. Mothers who had warned their children about strangers realized the real danger had been hiding in plain sight. Sheriff Hector Ramirez became the voice of a community finally exhaling after holding its breath for 20 years. The pursuit of justice had never stopped, even when hope seemed lost. But as the community celebrated, one question remained. What would happen when Gonzalez finally faced a judge and jury for his horrific crimes? The final chapter of this 2-decade saga was about to begin, and it would determine whether justice truly prevails. Valerie Laguna's case proves that time doesn't heal all wounds, but it can sharpen the tools of justice. 20 years ago, the DNA evidence that would eventually convict her killer existed, but the technology to read its secrets hadn't caught up yet. Today's forensic capabilities are light years beyond what investigators had in 2005. What seemed impossible then became inevitable through scientific advancement and relentless determination. This case stands as a beacon of hope for thousands of families still waiting for answers, still believing that their loved one's killer will face consequences. The Sexual Assault Kit Initiative didn't just fund laboratory tests. It funded hope, funded justice, funded the promise that no victim is ever forgotten. The true power of this resolution lies not just in the arrest, but in what it represents for every cold case file gathering dust on a shelf. Sheriff Ramirez and his team, along with the Texas Rangers, refused to let Valerie become another unsolved mystery. They carried her memory through multiple administrations, through budget cuts and personnel changes, through moments when giving up would have been easier. Valerie's daughters can now visit their mother's grave, knowing that her killer will never walk free again. The Cotulla community can sleep peacefully, no longer wondering if a murderer lives next door. Justice delayed is not justice denied when those seeking it refuse to surrender. Gonzalez now sits in LaSalle County Jail on a $1 million bond, awaiting trial for capital murder. The legal battle ahead will determine his ultimate fate, but one thing is certain: Valerie Laguna's voice has finally been heard after 2 decades of silence. Valerie's story is just one example of a cold case finally being solved. If you want more true crime stories that reveal the darkest secrets and bring justice to victims, subscribe now. Don't let these stories fade away. Keep uncovering the truth.